John Brennan is back with me. He's a former director of the CIA and an MSNBC senior national security and intelligence analyst. Director, let's just start with the idea that the Biden administration says it had at least one hand, if not two, tied behind its back because the Trump administration committed to America leaving Afghanistan. Do you buy into that argument?
Well, I do, because the Trump administration made this agreement with the Taliban that committed the United States to departing by May, but also the Trump administration had drawn down American troops to 2,500, the lowest that had been there in many, many, many years. And so therefore, the Biden administration was faced with a choice whether or not to withdraw those U.S. forces or to change course, which would have involved starting up the war again with the Taliban. And it was pointed out there, the Taliban was in the strongest position that they had been in years. So yes, the Biden administration was given a very poor hand, but it's almost inevitable that an operation of this size and magnitude was going to have real challenges and problems. And so when they got to withdraw in August, I think a lot of that just came to the fore.
There are criticisms of the report, obviously, including Jonathan Schroden, a military operations analyst who tweeted this week, "It isn't an objective attempt to identify or summarize lessons learned. It's a political document designed to deflect blame in advance of a gathering storm of House GOP hearings." I only ask you this because you've held senior positions in the administration. Is that true? Because there is a storm of GOP hearings coming that will take everything that happened since the beginning of the Biden administration and examine it under a microscope.
And I'm sure administration critics in Congress will use this as a political football in order to try to tarnish the administration. But let's face it, the situation in Afghanistan, it deteriorated far more rapidly than anybody anticipated. And the Afghan government then started to collapse, including the departure of President Abdul Ghani. And once that happened, there was this rolling sort of momentum of the people who wanted to depart. And so the United States was involved in a full retrograde, which is a withdrawal of all U.S. military personnel in Afghanistan, and at the same time was involved in a NEO. A NEO is a non-combatant evacuation operation, not just of U.S. citizens, but also of Afghan citizens, as well as allies and partners and the third country nationals who were trying to leave. The magnitude of this was unprecedented in history. And therefore, the Biden administration, I think, was grappling with a sharply and rapidly deteriorating situation, and they tried to do the best they can. And so are there lessons to be learned from this? Absolutely. But I think that, unfortunately, too many of these critics in Congress are going to distort what actually happened here. But again, I think it gets back to what you said early on, Ali, was that the Trump administration basically handed over this situation to the Biden administration. The Biden administration tried to do the best they could. Were there some problems and challenges? Absolutely. It's very tragic that U.S. military personnel and Afghan citizens were killed during this departure process. But again, looking at what the scale and magnitude of this was, it's understandable that it didn't occur flawlessly.
That conversation that Richard Engel and I were having that we played, that was August 15th of that year. It was actually 2 full weeks before the actual handover, because something had happened. The Taliban had gotten to Kabul faster than anybody thought they would. They had overcome resistance largely without any bullets fired in almost every province. Was that what happened there? Was that an intelligence failure, or was this whole operation just a logistics problem? What was the problem that led to this not going more smoothly? Even if you accept the fact that the Biden administration needed to carry this out, what could have made that better, in your opinion?
Well, I think they could have anticipated that this was going to deteriorate so rapidly. And as the report pointed out, they need to start to make these contingency plans for these low probability but high impact developments, which is what happened there. But again, I think the Afghan security and military and even intelligence forces started to collapse. And then when the senior government officials, including the president of Afghanistan, decided to leave, nobody in the Afghan government really wanted to stay behind and be part of this, burning ship. And so therefore, the United States military and diplomats and others really had to then scurry to try to deal with a fastly escalating and deteriorating situation, which we were able to see via the footage and the commentary of Richard Engel and others. But again, I think the Biden administration has learned lessons. That report pointed out what they're doing now in some other theaters in order to anticipate a sharp deterioration of events. That requires additional resources, additional efforts to ensure that things occur as smoothly and as best as they can.
John Brennan, we were fortunate to have you on the show this morning because we've had to cover a lot of ground with you in areas that you are expert at. So thank you for that. John Brennan is a former director of the CIA, MSNBC senior national security and intelligence analyst, author of Undaunted: My Fight Against America's Enemies at Home and Abroad.